Humanity stood on the fringes of the vast galactic assembly, their delegation dwarfed by the towering forms of beings from a dozen alien species. The assembly chamber, carved from shimmering crystal and lit by orbs that pulsed with ambient energy, was a monument to civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity's. The humans, in comparison, were like children among giants, their presence barely acknowledged except as a source of amusement. Dr. Eleanor Greaves adjusted her translator earpiece, her gaze flitting over the gathered aliens. She had spent years studying their languages, their cultures, and their hierarchies. She knew the contempt they held for humans. It was written in the dismissive flicks of tails, the curled sneers of reptilian lips, and the glint of amusement in compound eyes. Yet, it wasn't until the Zintran delegate spoke that the mockery cut through the air with unmistakable clarity. Primitive, the Zintran ambassador hissed, their voice resonating through the chamber. Their silvery scales shimmered as they gestured dismissively toward the human delegation. What can they possibly offer us? Stone tools? Crude weapons? They have barely begun to explore their own solar system, and they come here seeking equality. Laughter rippled through the assembly. Some of it was subdued, a low hum of amusement, but from the Zintrans, it was a full-throated roar. Eleanor clenched her fists under the table, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to respond, to shout back, but the words caught in her throat. Around her, the other human delegates shifted uncomfortably, their unease palpable. The leader of the human delegation, Ambassador Julian Orson, leaned forward. His face, lined with years of diplomatic effort, was calm, but Eleanor could see the tension in his jaw. The United Nations of Earth seeks only to contribute to the Galactic Union, Orson said, his voice steady. We may be young compared to your civilizations, but youth does not equate to insignificance. Every species starts somewhere. Bold words. The Zintran ambassador replied, their slit-pupiled eyes narrowing. But words are all they are. Your kind has no history, no legacy. You are a flicker in the vastness of time, a species so fragile, a single calamity could wipe you from existence. What could you possibly offer us? The laughter rose again, a cacophony of derision that echoed off the crystalline walls. Eleanor's heart pounded, the sound of her blood rushing in her ears. She forced herself to keep her expression neutral, but inside, she burned. She had dedicated her life to proving humanity's worth on this stage, and now, in the face of such overwhelming scorn, she felt small. It was then that she noticed something strange. Among the Zintran's laughter, there was a rhythm, a pattern. It was faint, buried beneath the layers of ridicule, but it was there. Eleanor had spent years studying linguistic structures, and her trained ear caught the repetition. It wasn't random mockery. It was deliberate, almost ritualistic. Later, as the human delegation withdrew from the assembly, their heads held high despite the humiliation, Eleanor couldn't shake the sound from her mind. She walked beside Orson, who was muttering about strategies for the next session, but her focus was elsewhere. Ambassador, she said, interrupting him. Did you hear it? Hear what? He asked, his tone weary. The way they laughed. It wasn't just mocking. There was a pattern to it. Orson raised an eyebrow. A pattern? Dr. Greaves, with all due respect, I don't think we need to analyze their laughter. We need to focus on strengthening our arguments. Eleanor nodded, not wanting to push the issue, but her mind was already racing. That night, in the privacy of her quarters, she replayed the recording of the session. She filtered out the ambient noise, isolating the Zintran's laughter. As she analyzed the sound, she began to notice something startling. The rhythm wasn't just a pattern. It was language. Her pulse quickened as she cross-referenced the sounds with her database of ancient Earth languages. The resemblance was faint but undeniable. The cadence of the Zintran's mockery mirrored fragments of an extinct human dialect, one that had been lost to time. Eleanor's hands trembled as she ran the analysis again, this time focusing on phonetic structures. The connections grew stronger. Could it be possible? Could the Zinthran's ancestors have interacted with humanity in the distant past? If so, why was there no record of it? The implications were staggering. If humanity shared a linguistic root with the Zinthrans, it would mean their histories were intertwined in ways no one had imagined. And if Eleanor could prove it, it would be more than just a rebuttal to the Assembly's mockery. It would be a revelation that could redefine humanity's place in the galaxy. The next morning, Eleanor approached Orson with her findings. "Ambassador," she said, her voice urgent, "I need your permission to investigate something. It could change everything." Orson looked at her skeptically. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, knowing how far-fetched it would sound. "I think the Zinthrans' ancestors might have influenced ancient human civilizations. I've found linguistic parallels that can't be coincidence." Orson frowned. "Dr. Greaves, we're trying to gain respect, not chase wild theories." "It's not a theory," she insisted. "I just need time to gather more evidence." "Please, Ambassador. If I'm right, this could be the breakthrough we need." He studied her for a long moment before sighing. "Fine, but don't let this distract you from our immediate goals. We can't afford to look more foolish than we already do." Eleanor nodded, her determination unwavering. She knew the risks, but she also knew the potential reward. If the Zinthrans' ancestors had left their mark on humanity, then perhaps humanity wasn't as insignificant as the galaxy believed. Perhaps they were part of a story far older and grander than anyone had imagined. As she delved deeper into her research, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something monumental. The Zinthran scorn had ignited a fire within her, and she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The air was thick with dust as Dr. Eleanor Greaves stepped into the ancient archives beneath the United Nations Science Division in Geneva. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, crammed with relics of humanity's past. This was where the remnants of lost civilizations were stored, forgotten languages, broken artifacts, and the fractured echoes of cultures that had vanished before the modern age. Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched a tablet displaying her notes, her mind racing with possibilities. She wasn't alone. The dim light cast shadows across the faces of her team, experts she'd handpicked for this venture. There was Dr. Marcus Vega, a grizzled archaeologist whose skepticism often bordered on cynicism, and Dr. Hannah Moriyama, a brilliant linguist with a knack for deciphering ancient scripts. Together, they formed a group united by ambition and the weight of ridicule hanging over them. "I still don't see how this is going to help," Marcus muttered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, his brow furrowed in doubt. "Even if you find linguistic overlaps, it doesn't mean their ancestors were here. Coincidence can play cruel tricks." Eleanor shot him a sharp glance. "Coincidence doesn't explain phonetic patterns across entirely unrelated species. You saw the data, Marcus." The Zinthran laughter wasn't random. It followed the structure of an ancient chant, a chant that hasn't been heard on Earth in over 2,000 years. Marcus shrugged but said nothing more. It was Hannah who broke the silence. "If Dr. Greaves is right," she said, her tone laced with cautious excitement, "this could rewrite everything we know about humanity's origins. And it might just make the Galactic Assembly take us seriously for once." The group moved deeper into the archives, passing crumbling scrolls and holographic displays cataloging millennia of history. Eleanor's steps quickened as they approached a sealed chamber. This was where the oldest and most fragile relics were kept, preserved in a sterile environment to prevent decay. Inside, the air was cold, and the faint hum of preservation systems filled the silence. Eleanor approached a display case, holding a weathered clay tablet, its surface etched with faded symbols. She'd seen images of it before, but now, standing in its presence, she felt the weight of its significance. "This is the Charsis tablet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was unearthed in Mesopotamia nearly a century ago, but no one's ever been able to translate it. The script doesn't match any known language on Earth." Hannah leaned closer, her eyes scanning the intricate carvings. And you think this connects to the Zintrans? Eleanor nodded. The patterns in their language, the rhythms, the phonemes, they're almost identical to parts of the script. If we can decipher it, we might find evidence of their presence on Earth. Marcus crossed his arms, skepticism still etched into his features. And what if we don't? What if this is just another dead end? Then we keep looking, Eleanor said firmly. But I don't think it's a dead end. I think this tablet is the key. For hours, the team worked in silence, their tools and scanners projecting holographic reconstructions of the tablet's surface. Hannah analyzed the symbols, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she cross-referenced them with linguistic databases. Marcus sifted through historical records, searching for clues that might provide context. As the hours stretched on, the room grew tense. Eleanor's eyes burned from staring at the holographic display, but she refused to rest. Every fiber of her being told her she was close to something monumental. Then, at last, Hannah's voice broke the silence. "I've got something." Eleanor and Marcus hurried to her side as she pointed to a section of the tablet's text. "These symbols, they're not standalone. They're phonetic, and when I mapped them onto the Zintern linguistic framework," she tapped a key and a string of sounds played through the speakers. Eleanor's breath caught. The sound was hauntingly familiar. It wasn't just a chant, it was a name. "It's a Zintern honorific," Hannah explained, her voice trembling. "It translates roughly to the bringers of light." Marcus frowned, his skepticism wavering. Why would an Earth artifact contain a Zintern title? Are you saying they visited us? That they taught this to ancient humans? Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding. It's not just a theory anymore. The Zintrans' ancestors must have been here. They influenced our early civilizations, and traces of their language survived in human memory. The implications were staggering. If this connection could be proven, it would shatter the Galactic Union's perception of humanity as an insignificant species. But it also raised unsettling questions. Why had the Zintrans' ancestors come to Earth? And why had their influence been buried beneath the sands of time? Before they could ponder further, Marcus spoke, his tone gruff but tinged with unease. "If we present this to the Assembly, they'll demand more than just linguistic overlaps. They'll want physical proof, artifacts, technology, something concrete." Eleanor nodded. "Then we find it. We follow this trail wherever it leads." The search led them to records of a long-forgotten archaeological site in the deserts of northern Africa. Decades ago, strange carvings had been unearthed there, but the findings had been dismissed as anomalies, their true significance overlooked. Now, with the Charsis tablet as their guide, Eleanor was certain the site held the answers they sought. Under the searing sun, the team uncovered remnants of a structure buried beneath the dunes. The walls were inscribed with symbols identical to those on the tablet, their edges worn but still legible. Among the ruins, they found something even more startling, a fragment of an object that defied human craftsmanship. It was a shard of a material unknown to Earth, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to hum with latent energy. When Eleanor held it, she felt a faint vibration, as if it resonated with something deep within her. "This," Marcus said, his voice hushed, "this is what they'll listen to. Physical proof." Eleanor's mind raced. The evidence was compelling, but it was only the beginning. They had uncovered a fragment of the past, but the full story remained buried. Yet, as she stared at the alien shard in her hand, she felt a flicker of hope. For the first time, humanity had a chance to rewrite its place in the galaxy, not as a species to be mocked, but as one whose history intertwined with the stars themselves. The Galactic Assembly convened once more, its crystalline chamber brimming with an air of tense expectation. The human delegation stood at the far edge of the chamber, dwarfed by the grandeur of the alien delegates. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a distant tide, and while the words were in dozens of tongues, the tone of dismissal was universal. Humans had been humiliated here before. What could they possibly bring now that would change anything? Dr. Eleanor Greaves stood behind Ambassador Julian Orson, clutching a small case that contained humanity's fragile hope. Her mind buzzed with the memory of the past weeks. The sleepless nights decoding symbols, the unearthing of alien shards in the desert, and the weight of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about proving humanity's worth. It was about uncovering the truth of their shared history with a species that viewed them with utter disdain. The Zinthran ambassador, resplendent in their iridescent scales, stepped forward, their thin lips curled in a mocking smile. "Ah! The humans return," they said, their voice a serpentine hiss. "What lesson in humility will you provide us today?" Eleanor tightened her grip on the case. The words stung, but they no longer mattered. Not now. Orson, ever the diplomat, raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "We come today not with words, but with evidence," he said, his voice steady. "Evidence of a connection between humanity and the Zinthran people." The chamber erupted in murmurs, the gathered species exchanging skeptical glances. The Zinthran ambassador tilted their head, amusement flashing in their slitted eyes. "Evidence? Of what?" "That your species once crawled from the mud." Eleanor stepped forward, the case clutched to her chest. "Evidence that your ancestors walked among us," she said, her voice clear and firm, "and that their language still echoes in our history." The murmurs quieted as the chamber turned its focus to her. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the pressure of thousands of eyes on her. But she held her ground, her resolve unshaken. She opened the case, revealing the fragment they had uncovered in the desert. Its surface shimmered faintly under the chamber's ethereal light, the alien symbols etched into it glowing softly. "This shard," Eleanor began, "was found in a structure buried beneath the sands of Earth, alongside inscriptions identical to those on the Charsis tablet. These symbols match linguistic patterns found in your sacred texts." The Zinthran ambassador's amused expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "This proves nothing," they said, though their voice lacked its earlier confidence. Eleanor's heart raced. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the culmination of years of work and sacrifice. She took a deep breath and stepped further into the center of the chamber, every word measured and deliberate. "I have studied your language for years," she said, addressing the assembly as a whole. "I've listened to your rituals, your chants, and even your laughter. And within them, I found echoes of something ancient, something human." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Eleanor reached into the case and pulled out a small device, pressing a button to play the audio recording they had reconstructed. The sound filled the room, a hauntingly rhythmic chant, the cadence unmistakable. It was the same phrase she had heard in the Zinthran laughter, but now spoken in the reconstructed tones of ancient humans. The Zinthrans froze. Their ambassador's pupils widened, and a ripple of what could only be described as shock passed through their delegation. The chant was unmistakably familiar, an invocation sacred to their kind. "This phrase," Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the tension in the room, "is preserved in the oldest records of Earth's history. It is a chant passed down through millennia, long before it was forgotten, and yet it is identical to your most sacred invocations." The Zinthran ambassador stepped forward, their composure visibly shaken. "How?" they demanded, their voice low and dangerous. "How could your kind possess knowledge of our ancestors' language?" Eleanor met their gaze, her confidence unwavering. "Because your ancestors left their mark on us," she said. "They came to Earth long ago and shared their knowledge with humanity. The echoes of that encounter were preserved in our languages, our rituals, and our artifacts." The chamber buzzed with renewed energy, the other species murmuring among themselves. The implications were clear. If humanity's history was tied to that of the Zinthrans, they could no longer be dismissed as insignificant. One of the elder Zinthrans, their scales dull with age but their presence commanding, stepped forward. Their voice, though quieter, carried a weight that silenced the room. "The chant," they said, their tone reverent. "Speak it again." Eleanor hesitated for a moment before repeating the chant, her pronunciation careful and precise. The elder closed their eyes, their expression unreadable. When they spoke again, their voice trembled. "It is true," they said, addressing the assembly. "These words are ancient, older than any record we possess. They are the words of our progenitors, a greeting offered only to those deemed worthy." A stunned silence fell over the chamber. The Zintern ambassador turned to the elder, their expression conflicted. "This cannot be," they said. Humans are more than we believed," the elder interrupted. "If they carry the legacy of our ancestors, then they are not to be mocked. They are to be respected." Eleanor exhaled, the weight of the moment crashing over her. She had done it. Humanity had done it. The truth of their shared history was undeniable, and with it came the promise of a new chapter, one where humans were no longer outcasts but equals. As the assembly erupted into debate, Eleanor stepped back, her mind already racing with what came next. This was only the beginning. The Zinterns might now acknowledge their connection, but the full story remained buried in the past, waiting to be unearthed. And Eleanor was determined to uncover it, no matter what lay ahead. The days following the assembly's revelation were a whirlwind for Eleanor and her team. The moment the Zintern elder acknowledged humanity's link to their ancient progenitors, the tides of galactic perception began to shift. For the first time, the laughter that had mocked humanity was silenced, replaced by curiosity, suspicion, and begrudging respect. Yet, respect was not enough. Eleanor sat in a dimly lit chamber aboard the UN starship Endeavour, her gaze fixed on the holographic projection hovering above the table. It was a detailed map of a distant star system, one that matched the coordinates extracted from inscriptions on the alien shard. She had argued fiercely for this expedition, convincing Earth's leadership that it was their chance to cement humanity's newfound position in the galaxy. "The coordinates are clear," she said, addressing the team gathered around her. "If this system holds ruins or artifacts, we'll have undeniable proof of our shared history. It's not just about the Zinterns anymore. It's about our place in the galaxy. If we don't act, this moment will slip through our fingers." Marcus Vega leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "It's a bold gamble," he said. "We're heading into unknown territory, relying on fragments of ancient data and a shard that glows when it feels like it. What if we find nothing? Then we try again," Eleanor replied, her voice firm. "We've come too far to stop now. This is about more than validation. It's about understanding who we are." Hannah Moriyama nodded, her expression resolute. "The Zinterns have spent centuries positioning themselves as one of the dominant powers in the Assembly. If we can prove our connection to their origins, it will reshape the balance of power. They won't be able to dismiss us anymore." The Endeavour launched a day later, its engines propelling the vessel toward the distant system. The journey was tense, every member of the crew acutely aware of the stakes. Eleanor spent much of the trip poring over data, analyzing ancient texts, and preparing for what lay ahead. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental and dangerous. When they arrived, the system was bathed in the light of a dying star, its crimson glow casting long shadows over the planets orbiting it. The team's focus was drawn to the fourth planet, a barren world whose surface was marked by sprawling geometric patterns visible from orbit. Eleanor stared at the images on the screen, her breath catching. "Those aren't natural formations," she said. "They're structures. Massive ones." Marcus whistled low. "Looks like we're not the first visitors here." The landing was rough, the planet's thin atmosphere making descent challenging. As the Endeavour touched down near one of the largest formations, the crew prepared for their expedition. Eleanor stepped onto the planet's surface, the dry air biting at her skin. Around her, the ruins loomed like the bones of some ancient beast, their alien architecture both awe-inspiring and foreboding. The team moved cautiously, scanning the structures for signs of activity. The symbols carved into the walls were eerily familiar, mirroring the patterns from the Charsis tablet and the shard. Eleanor ran her fingers over the cold stone, the weight of history pressing down on her. "These ruins are ancient," Hannah said, her voice hushed. "They predate anything we've found on Earth. And yet," Eleanor replied, "they're connected to us, to our history." Deeper into the ruins, they found what appeared to be a central chamber. At its heart was a massive obelisk, its surface covered in glowing inscriptions that pulsed faintly as they approached. The shard in Eleanor's possession vibrated in response, the hum resonating in the still air. "This is it," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. "This obelisk, it's a message, a record." The team worked quickly, setting up equipment to translate the inscriptions. As the words began to form on their screens, Eleanor's heart raced. The obelisk spoke of a time when the Zinthran's ancestors had wandered the stars, seeding knowledge across fledgling civilizations. Earth had been one of many worlds they visited, chosen for its potential. "They called themselves the Lumina," Hannah said, her eyes wide as she read the translation. "They believed it was their duty to guide younger species, to help them grow. But why did they stop?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with unease. The answer came moments later, as the translation continued. The Lumina had vanished, their great civilization brought low by an unknown catastrophe. The Zinthrans were their descendants, survivors who had forgotten their purpose over millennia. The record suggested that humanity carried a fragment of their legacy, a spark of their knowledge, buried deep in human history. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just connected to the Zinthrans. They were inheritors of a legacy far older and more profound than anyone had imagined. But as the obelisk's glow began to dim, the team's elation was cut short. A warning appeared on their screens, its meaning clear despite the ancient language. "Beware the darkness that follows the light." Marcus frowned. "What does that mean?" Eleanor shook her head, her mind racing. "I don't know. But whatever happened to the Lumina, it wasn't natural. Something destroyed them." The obelisk's hum faded, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the discovery overshadowed by a growing sense of foreboding. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor looked back at the ruins, a knot of determination tightening in her chest. They had uncovered the truth of humanity's connection to the stars, but it was only the beginning. The legacy of the Lumina was theirs to reclaim, but so too were the dangers that had wiped them from existence. Eleanor knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time, humanity had a chance to rise. Not as the galaxy's outcasts, but as the heirs of a forgotten empire. The Endeavor glided silently through the cold void of space, its crew still reeling from the weight of their discovery. Eleanor stood in the observation deck, staring out at the expanse of stars, her mind turning over the implications of the obelisk's warning. The Lumina, the progenitors of the Zinthrans and, by extension, humanity's own ancient guides, had been obliterated by something they had not understood or could not stop. That same danger could still linger. Marcus joined her, his expression grim. "You've been quiet since we left the ruins. I take it the warnings got you spooked too." Eleanor didn't look away from the stars. "It's not just a warning. It's everything. The Lumina's legacy, our connection to them. If we're inheriting their role in the galaxy, does that mean we're also inheriting their enemies? What if we're walking the same path that destroyed them?" Marcus sighed, leaning against the bulkhead. "We could debate the what-ifs all day, but it won't change what we've uncovered. The Zinthrans can't ignore us now. Whether they like it or not, we're part of their history and their future." "Maybe," Eleanor said softly, "but the Zinthrans aren't the ones I'm worried about. Something out there wiped out an entire civilization advanced enough to shape the destinies of countless worlds. If we don't figure out what happened to them, we could be next." The door to the observation deck slid open, and Hannah stepped in, holding a tablet. "We've finished analyzing the data from the obelisk," she said, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and urgency. "It's more than just a warning. There's a map embedded in the inscriptions, another set of coordinates. It looks like the Lumina left a final sanctuary somewhere in the galactic core. Eleanor turned to face her, her heart skipping a beat. A sanctuary? Could it hold answers about what happened to them? It's possible, Hannah said. If we can reach it, we might find records, technology, anything that could help us understand their fate. But it's a long shot. The core is dangerous territory, filled with radiation storms and gravitational anomalies. We'd need approval from the Assembly just to attempt the journey. Marcus snorted. Good luck getting that. The Zintrans will fight us every step of the way. They barely tolerated us digging into their history. They won't want us uncovering anything that challenges their status. Eleanor straightened, a newfound resolve hardening her features. Then we make them see reason. If the Lumina's sanctuary holds the key to understanding their downfall, it's not just humanity's survival at stake. It's the survival of every species in the galaxy. The following days were a blur of tense negotiations with the Assembly. The Zintran ambassador, their pride clearly wounded by humanity's revelations, was the most vocal opponent of the mission. The sanctuaries of our ancestors are sacred, they argued. They are not for outsiders to plunder. But Eleanor's determination proved unshakable. Standing before the Assembly, she delivered a speech that left the chamber silent. This isn't about plundering, she said, her voice echoing in the crystalline halls. It's about preservation, of knowledge, of history, of life itself. The Lumina didn't leave their legacy for one species alone. They left it for all of us. If we ignore their warnings, we risk repeating their mistakes. By the time she finished, even the Zintran elder who had acknowledged humanity's connection to their ancestors seemed moved. Reluctantly, the Assembly granted their approval, though the Zintrans made it clear they would be watching closely. The journey to the galactic core was perilous, the Endeavor navigating through a labyrinth of deadly phenomena. Radiation storms battered the ship's shields, and gravitational eddies threatened to tear it apart. But Eleanor and her team pressed on, driven by the weight of their mission. At last they arrived. The sanctuary was hidden within a pocket of calm amidst the chaos, its shimmering structure a masterpiece of alien design. It floated in the void like a jewel, its surface glowing with a soft, golden light. The team descended into the sanctuary, their footsteps echoing in the vast, silent halls. Unlike the ruins on the desert planet, this place was intact, its system still humming with life. Holographic projections activated as they moved, displaying scenes of the Lumina's history, their rise, their achievements, and their ultimate downfall. Eleanor's breath caught as she watched the final projection. It showed the Lumina's desperate attempts to combat an encroaching darkness, a force that consumed stars, civilizations, and entire worlds. The images were haunting, the devastation unimaginable. It's worse than we thought, Hannah whispered. This wasn't just a catastrophe. It was a predator, something that hunted them. Marcus frowned, his jaw tight. And if it's still out there? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She approached the final hologram, which displayed a message in the Lumina's ancient script. The translation appeared on her tablet. To those who follow, we leave this sanctuary as a beacon of hope and a warning. Unite or face extinction. The darkness waits for no one. She turned to her team, her expression resolute. We can't ignore this. The Lumina saw the potential for unity, for strength and cooperation. If we're going to survive, we need to take that lesson to heart. Humanity, the Zintrans, the entire Assembly, we all need to stand together. As they prepared to depart the sanctuary, Eleanor felt a mix of hope and trepidation. They had uncovered the truth of humanity's connection to the stars and the legacy of the Lumina. But they had also uncovered a greater threat, one that loomed over the galaxy like a shadow. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Eleanor knew one thing for certain. Humanity was no longer alone in the cosmos. And for the first time, they had a chance to shape their own destiny, not as outcasts, but as heirs to a legacy of light.